line by line. Before we get into today's festivities, covering arguably one of, well, I would say inarguably one of the most, but arguably the most famous story from the Old Testament. Couple of things off the top. We are going to be, as I said, going through the Old Testament chapter by chapter, line by line, verse by verse. We are in First Samuel currently, and as we work our way through, we'll be reading the chapter, stopping, talking about it, all of that. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to go ahead and chime in the comment section from wherever you are tuning in from. We welcome the questions because inevitably we're not going to be able to hit on everything. We're not going to be able to touch every single question that every person has. And the reality is, if you have the question, then likely someone else has the question as well. So please feel free to go ahead and chime in. Also, say good morning and let us know where you are tuning in from. A couple of things I will go ahead and mention it here since I've mentioned it on other streams within the KFM broadcasting family. If you are tuning in this morning from one of the Twitch channels that we are currently going live from, go ahead and chime in, shout us out, let us know that you are tuning in from there specifically, because if you do, you will be entered into a drawing for a discount code for our merch shop over on kfmbroadcasting.com, where you can go ahead, you will potentially get a discount code there. So make sure that you are shutting that up. We are trying to grow those channels. So if you aren't currently following us over there, go ahead and find us. You can find Misfits Outdoors. You can find KFM Broadcasting, Buddy Walk Pod, as well as, of course, Ant is the one that has the ridiculous name that I can never remember. Apostle.
It's like 2274, I think.
I've never fixed that.
So anyway, all the housekeeping stuff aside, make sure that you are following us there because we do go live throughout the week as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the text. Hopefully along the way, Andrew does not break another fishing pole and have to go MacGyver on us.
Yeah.
But we shall see. Who knows what this stream. So we are going to go ahead and jump into First Samuel chapter 17. And I'm going to be reading out of the NLT. Feel free to join with whatever translation you please. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Saka in Judah and Azekah in Ephes Demin. Saul countered by gathering the Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills, with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, Then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. Then when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephraite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at this time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day, Jesse said to David, take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers and give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they are doing. David's brothers were with Saul in the Israelite army at the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts as Jesse had directed. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant? The men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempt from paying taxes. David asked the soldiers standing nearby, what will a man get for killing the Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? And these men gave David the same reply. They said, yes, that is the reward for killing him. But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. What have I done now? David replied. I was only asking a question. He walked over to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Saul finally consented. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with the shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy faced boy. Am I a dog? He roared at David, that you come at me with a stick? And he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from his sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Sharon, as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's army in his own tent. As Saul watched David go out to fight the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of his army, Abner, whose son is this young man? I really don't know, Abner declared. Well, find out who he is, the king told him. As soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Tell me about your father, young man, Saul said. And David replied, his name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem. All right. So, a lot happening in this story, and it goes here, there, and everywhere. When we hear David and Goliath come up, it turns into everything from a motivational speech to a kid's story. So Ant, I'll go ahead and throw it to you first. Where do you start the process of processing what seems like at surface level um a larger than life story?
Yeah. I think again we start with, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this passage? Is it to turn David into a hero? Is it to, create a beautiful metaphor or analogy that we all can, you know, enjoy and insert ourselves into, or is it, you know, bringing David into the story and Saul getting to know who David is, because David one day is going to be the king. And this is our introduction to someone who trusts God in such a way that they're willing to risk everything because they trust in the Lord. David here is 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 illustrating in this particular story um, his humility, his trust in the Lord. Um, people don't even know who this kid is. They're like, "Well, who is this guy anyway?" He's still a little brother, so he's getting chastised by his older brother. Like, what are you doing here? You know, David here. We're getting introduced to a part of who David is that will later on be important, because David will be a king who does wage war, who does lead armies and things of that nature. But this is about humility, faith, weird words like honor that people don't really talk about anymore. The, 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 that's what you're seeing here. This is not about, like you said, me or you slaying our giants. This is about learning what it looks like for someone to really trust God, and um, it be about God. Even his reason for fighting was not
Right.
about himself. It was actually about honoring God. And so that's where I would start is, what is this about? Well, this is about being introduced to David and seeing his character and his love and devotion to God.
No.
Well, and I'd add to that also that when we hear people try to make the story something, or they use the phrase that a David and Goliath event, they they're doing the same thing that Saul is doing in the story, because I mean David's whole thing is, why are we afraid of this guy? Like, God's way bigger than him. And so the idea of David and
Right.
Goliath being, oh
God
look, the little guy wins, misses the point of the story, because the whole story is that God was never the little guy. And so, like, it it becomes something that it's not, simply by the fact that, again, we get caught up. This is one of those places, I think, where the narrative actually is part of where we get caught up, is that the story itself sounds like one of the little guy finally gets his day. But the reality is, it was always, God is going to get his day regardless of who the enemy thinks they are. God is going to get his day.
I would, I would pivot that just a little bit personally in the way that I would state that. I largely agree with what you're saying. So I'll go into the bit first, because if you've ever heard me talk about this,
go
then
to the
you've
bit.
heard me say this. But here we go. Okay, uncomfortable conversation for some people. You are not David. You are not Goliath. You are not the stone. You are not. You are in no way, shape, or form involved in any of this. This is not
Yeah.
something that you are supposed to read yourself into. God is not there to slay your giants. That's not the point and purpose of this story. Um, and I think sometimes I don't think it's necessarily about the little guy
Right.
getting his. I think for a lot of people, it truly actually is about God getting his and God being the victor. But I think the bigger stumbling block is ridding yourself into the text and using this as an analogy for whatever the
Yeah.
issue is, that through the help of the Lord, you will overcome your giants, whatever your giants are. It can mean literally anything. I've watched people mean that from car payments to cancer and everything in between. Like, it's literally all
Hmm.
of the different. things. Now, I want to be clear in no uncertain terms. As a side note, I believe miracles happen. I believe crazy things. I've seen crazy things happen, like just wilding out things that can only be from God. All of those kinds of things. Yes, God is very present. Yes, God is very capable. Yes, all of the things. But like Ian said, when we are working our way through the narrative of Scripture, and we hit a story like this, we have to keep it about the thing.
Right.
We can keep this to the fact that God is capable of all this other stuff, but we can also do that without taking this story and co-opting it to mean whatever we mean. Like it sounds good, it spins good to say that God will help you slay your giants. You're the David and Goliath story, and all of those kinds of things. That sounds good from a pulpit. Unfortunately, that'll preach, but
Yeah.
just because it'll preach doesn't mean that it's accurate. And we have to keep to a certain level of authenticity. So, like I said, I largely agree with what you said, Andrew. I don't think there's anything like wild now about it or anything else like that. And there is a level of a stumbling block at the underdog story level of David and Goliath. I just think that the bigger stumbling block in the whole thing is where we start to stick God into the conversation, when we start to stick ourselves into the conversation,
Yeah.
when things become analogous for other things, and we start to pull this thing forward. Because and in addition to, I think there's actually, like, but we say this a lot, like there's a couple of things that we find ourselves, we kind of backed our way into kind of having some tentpole concepts that keep coming up throughout the entirety of the Old Testament, and one of them,
Shocker.
yeah, that I at least for me, I feel like I say almost every single stream is, I think some of the most fascinating stuff about these stories comes out when you let it sit in antiquity, when you let
Yeah.
it sit in the context of what actually was. Like, I'll give an example, right? For instance, I was watching a YouTube video on the accuracy of the sling and the rock.
Mm.
Because that's a whole thing. Like, that's a whole thing. That, like, oh, Rock could have never done that. That was where God stepped in. This is the da da da. Okay, so somebody took a sling that, like, weapons analysts would have said, like, this is what they're talking about, of a sling of the day, and a stone, and took that thing and whipped it and threw it and did an impact test on it. There was enough impact to
Right.
break the skull, like to
Yeah.
actually go, like,
Yeah.
break the bone and insert itself into a human skull. Um, so like that, like somebody with pinpoint accuracy to do that, you don't even need, like, okay, did God did God make a miracle that that stone landed out right on that? Oh, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. That's above my pay grade. So I'm not gonna try to pretend like I know the definitive answer. But a crack shot could have made that and still
Mm-hmm.
done the damage and taken him out. But notice what it said. Notice what it said. It knocked him out. It knocked him down. And then he took the sword
Mm.
Yeah.
and took him out. And in a much more, like, I guess, typical fashion of what you would think, and all of that. So, like, that's where I think, again, I kind of went on a rant about this earlier this week, if you caught Pastor Reacts with Andrew, and where I just, okay, great that we teach kids Bible stories and all of that sort of stuff. I have no notes. That's great. We need to start somewhere, and we can't start with dumping all manner of systematic theology on a young child and all of that sort of stuff. So we have to do something and all of that. But when we're talking about a Sunday school education on these specific stories and all of that, and that's all we sit at, is a Sunday school
Yeah.
level education on these stories. Generally, that's where we end up with something that's left from center. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because we take something out. You have to. If all you have is Sunday school, that's you have to take something out of the full and complete context.
Well, and I'll also add that the opposite extreme also I've seen happen as well is that because this is such a Sunday school story, that I don't know how many people I've heard that have tried to overanalyze the story to the point of, like you said, the whole idea of the rock and the sling couldn't do that, so it's supernatural. But even the idea of, like, they start analyzing why, how important it is that David took 5 stones and that he was sending a message and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, we with kids, we go and we dump stuff that's way too heavy, and then we do the same thing as adults, just because we can't just let a story of God providing for his people be a story about God providing for his people. Like, why is that not enough of a message to come out of the story that we have to add all this extra stuff into it?
Yeah, I've like you said, the 5 stones. Oh, that's the Torah. This represents
Yeah,
this, and it's like, why couldn't it just be stones? It's
yeah.
just why does it
He
have to be? Why does it have to
he
be
was well
some?
prepared. Why is that an issue?
Why does? Yeah, I
That
mean,
was modernized sort. Like anyway, okay,
yeah.
I'm not gonna.
So I mean,
There you
but
go.
a lot of times we're looking for something deeper instead of, let's just study it, because realistically, what's deeper is how this plays into the overall story
Yeah,
of David.
like,
This
this
is
is a
this is
big
showing us,
milestone.
right. This is showing us bits and pieces leading up to this king, this future king, who people are going to honor and respect and all that kind of stuff. But he starts as this kid that everybody's like, get out of here. What are you doing here? Right? Kind of thing. Which again, I think, I don't know if it was you or Andrew, the story is about God. The story is about him. It's not necessarily, about David and ourselves being David slaying our giants. It's about God defending Israel here. God is the protector of Israel. And just like he can make a donkey talk, he could take a kid and take out Goliath.
Yep. We have a couple of commenters that I want to get to before we get weird here for a second. Geo Mornings,
Before.
glad with us. Yeah. Um, and then we have Khalil. Needed this today. God was never the little guy. Great way
Right.
to put it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And good morning.
absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So that's the big one, right? Like the motivational rah rah, you're gonna slay your giants with the help of God and all that sort of stuff. And honestly, I don't and I feel like this needs to be said for anybody that struggles with that. I feel like we need to just put that last little period at the end of that sentence as to why. Why is that a big deal? Because it all sounds good. Like literally, a part of what I do is I am a motivational speaker. I love helping people realize how strong they are. There's nothing wrong with motivation to an extent. That being said, when we start to say things like God will help you slay your giant, we set people up for a hard fall when the healing doesn't come and it feels like the prayer wasn't answered and
Yeah.
tragedy strikes and all of those kinds of things because we haven't prepared ourselves for the fact that life is hard.
Yeah,
Life is rough because we fill our heads with God's going to save the day every single time. And we need to make sure that we are tempering where we are at with a realistic view of the world and of life and not setting ourselves up for false expectations on what's going to happen and what life is going to look like and all of that. And that's honestly where you find a lot of times when you find somebody who struggles with this idea of the problem of suffering and wrapping their head around it and all of that sort of stuff, generally because they were fed a bill of goods that God was going to step in at any and all time.
Yeah.
And that's just not the reality of it. Like, I understand that's awkward. That doesn't make people feel good, but it's the reality. And so that's the issue. That's why we fight so hard against these misappropriations of biblical content, because it's ultimately for a better understanding of who God is in full totality, to see the real beauty, to see the depth of God's love, and not expect God to be Superman in every single situation. So, that being said, what do we make of Goliath being 9 feet tall? We're not getting out of this one without talking about Goliath being a giant and getting weird for a second. So there's all sorts of things from ancient aliens to descendants of God to all kinds, or descendants of the angels, and all kinds of different theories. So what do we make of it? Is it hyperbolic? Is it part of the evidence that this never actually happened and that this is just a story that was passed down, or is this something that is a bit more tangible? And we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say that is definitely something tangible because um, Goliath, being a descendant of what the Anak. Anak was a giant, quote unquote. Remember when they went into the land of Canaan? I think we read about this about 4 years ago. No, just kidding. Well,
Just about.
when we were when we were in the book of Numbers, we're in the book of Numbers in chapter 13. They come across uh, uh, a land of giants in Numbers 13:33. It says they saw giants. The descendants of Anak came from giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so even then, there were large individuals. Now they argue over the translation of the height. Was it 9 feet 6 inches or 6 feet 9 inches? Which depending on what translation, what text you have, Masoretic versus the different texts. But what we can say for sure was by their reaction, this man had to be large
Yeah.
Yeah,
because their
yeah,
reaction to him was that they were astonished. So whether he was 9 feet, 7 feet, whatever, he was larger than your average person just by reading the text and looking at their reaction. Do we know for certain that he was 9 feet tall? No, we don't. But does that change? And I'm gonna use Joe's terminology. Does that change the story? This guy's a big man. The events around it are still leading towards the same point. Whether he's 6'9" or 9'6", the
yeah.
story remain. It doesn't actually change the story at all, and that's where I'll leave that.
Well, and I would add too that, I mean, and Joe, you can speak to this even more from your fighting days. I mean, it really doesn't matter even what the actual, like, this is not the StatCast era type of thing. Like, we don't need to know the details. All we know is that this guy was big enough to strike fear into the people.
Right.
That's going to affect you even just from a one-on-one, like, fighting, like, athletic type of thing. The size of a person has a psychological effect that's going to cause you to react differently than if it's a little tiny person. Doesn't mean the other guy's actually big. It just means that he carries himself in such a way. And so, it even if the writer did write 9 foot, if he looks like he's 9 foot, they're going to react as if he's 9 foot. Even if he's only 6 foot, even if he's on stilts, it doesn't matter. That's going to be the reaction the people are going to have, and so that's going to be how the people are going to be trying to fight him.
Yeah, yeah. there's a reason why, and you can also speak to this. There's a reason why when you watch boxing, MMA, whatever, um, fighters are mean mugging the entire way down to the thing, and
Right.
you get that touch of gloves, and it's all a battle of psychology. At that point, it's one fighter trying to get into another fighter's head, and all of that. And so, yes, there is absolutely truth to what Andrew is saying, that perception in combat is oftentimes reality, in the sense that it will affect how you operate and all of it. And you said something, and you just kind of drove by it, but I want to camp on it, because it's something that I think is important in how we process scripture. So I need to start by clearing something up. I threw a whole bunch of things out there, aliens and this and that. For anybody who is of a particular vintage,
Right.
then you remember History Channel After Dark. There was a point in time, for those of you that don't know, for our younger audience, where History Channel was like essentially World War II documentaries up until about, I don't know, 8, 9 o'clock. And then it got weird. Then all manner of craziness started showing up on the Bible code and ancient aliens and Nostradamus and all of this wild out stuff. And this is one of those stories that kind of found its way in a lot of those TV shows. This the giants as a whole in the scriptures being a descendant or being descendants of angels and all kinds of stuff. Were they aliens? Like all kinds.
Demigods.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, in the same way that the stone and the shot that David takes is given a supernatural spin. In the same way, a lot of times Goliath is given a supernatural spin. Even if we don't out and out say, "Oh, we think this or we think that," Goliath is given a supernatural spin. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is, if that's what they saw, that's what they wrote. Okay,
Yeah.
but stop. Hit the pause button, because at that point in time, you just caused so many people to throw a red flag. Oh, are you saying the Bible isn't true? Oh, are you saying that they got something wrong? Oh, are you saying that the Bible's imperfect? Oh, are you saying that textual criticism is more important than inerrancy? Oh, I've heard it all. I've heard
Oh
all
yeah.
of the different goings on of all of the different statements about whether or not the Bible is trustworthy, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Here's the deal. When we're looking at the ancient scriptures, when we are talking about this era of biblical history, there are temples that by different footprints of different things within history, that we can say, oh, hey, this corroborates, this corroborates, this corroborates. There's footprints along the way. History wasn't recorded in the way that we think about history being recorded. It just wasn't. And when you look at a text like this, it goes back. That's why what Ant said is so incredibly, vitally important. Does it change the point and purpose of the text? Does it change what it's telling you about God? And the fact that this is a story that has been logged, that showcased, okay, is this huge? Yes, this is huge, but it doesn't need to be supernatural in order for it to be huge, and it doesn't need to be exact, beat for beat, detail for detail, in order for it to be significant, or in order for it to be trustworthy. So, regardless, if he was 6'5", 6'6", 6'9", 7'5", 8 foot, 9 foot, whatever the case may be, nobody had a ruler and measured the dude from head to toe.
There was no way in. Yeah.
Yeah, there were no weigh-ins here, guys. And so those sorts of details. Okay, can we kick the can around and start talking about things like when I was working on one of the series for Buddy Walk and the whole looking into Adam and Eve and the different theories on de novo creation and all of this sort of stuff. That there are theories out there that this all basically descended from pre-Adamic humans, that all of that it's a lineage of pre-Adamic humans. That's one thing. That's one theory. I don't know. Is it fun to kick the can around in certain regards? Sure, let's have fun. I don't care. No harm, no foul. But when we start to need to fill in every single detail in order for the Bible to be trustworthy, that's where we're going to run into trouble. Inevitably, we're going to run into trouble because we simply do not have all of the details. And so I think it's important not to skim past this idea that what they were seeing and how they were perceiving it mattered more than the exact measurement. Because regardless if it was 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot nine, he was still bigger than the rest of them. He was still bigger than everybody else that was there. That's what we need to know in this situation.
And he was
Yeah,
big enough. I was gonna say, he's big enough also to make all of the people except for David be willing to let the guy sit there and blaspheme God. Like nobody had, he was big enough to make everybody say it. This guy's allowed to say it because I'm not messing with him. Like that is the main point, is that he scared them into saying this guy is able to blaspheme our God.
yeah. From a modern standpoint, think about if Shaquille O'Neal, of the Los Angeles Lakers, was standing there. How intimidating a person. And in the modern sense, we don't call him a Nephilim or this or that. He's just a basketball player, right? And
Yeah.
we watch basketball, and there's a whole bunch of 6'8", 6'9", 7 foot, 7'5", 7 people that if they walked into a regular restaurant, people in the room would say, "What in the world?" Right?
Yep.
So there have always been people, right, that have been bigger than everybody else. And I like what you guys said. From an athletic standpoint, they passed the eye test. You're like,
Yep.
whoa,
Yep.
I don't want to mess with that guy. Yeah, I don't. Whether like you said, it's boxing, wrestling, MMA, even football. Khalil is a football player. There's some guys that walk on the field, and you're like, what? What? Are the pads wearing him, or is he wearing the pads? Like,
Yeah.
like which? And so, you know, I I love what you said. I echo it again and again. It doesn't change the story.
Yeah.
Yep.
You still
Yep.
get the same meaning whether he's 6'9" or 9'6". So
Yeah. I think I read this story and I think about my brother. Uh, Dude's about 7 foot tall and needs to crouch down to come into my house.
your house.
And like, I'm not, I'm not by any standard and measurement a small human being. Okay. And dude dwarfs me. Like, dude makes me look small. And so I'm like, this is just that's just when we take I'm going to say common sense out of the equation, we're only left with a History Channel After Dark. So like let's remember that even though yes, there's a million things about this story that have to live in the lens of antiquity, let's remember that we're still talking about humans. We're talking about humans many years ago in an entirely different context, but we're still talking about humans nonetheless. And it goes back to the other thing that we've talked about over and over and over. One of the most beautiful things about the scriptures is that they continue to showcase humanity. They continue to showcase the very human side of the entire situation and picture of the context of these things. So, yeah, I think we hit all of the major angles as far as this goes. I'm sure somebody somewhere somehow has made and concocted some weird and wild analogy for David and Goliath that we have not touched on here this morning. So I'll just leave it at this. Part of what we do here is to equip you all to be able to deal with any malformed idea of the scriptures, not by naming every single malformed idea of the scriptures, but by helping you to reason your way through the scriptures and figure out what it's actually saying. So, regardless of whatever angle somebody takes on the David and Goliath story, hopefully, in the last, I don't know, 45 minutes, as we've been covering the David and Goliath story, that we have equipped you with the ability to be able to reason your way through it without getting lost in the sauce. So with that, let's go ahead and jump back into the text. We are going to pick it back up with chapter 18. After David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and danced with joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What's this? He said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands? Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand, and he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David escaped him twice. Saul was then afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul. Finally, Saul sent him away and appointed him commander over 1,000 men, and David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops in the battle. One day, Saul said to David, I am ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as his wife, or as your wife. But first, you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battle. For Saul thought, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him rather than doing it myself. Who am I and what is my family in Israel that I should be the king's son of? David exclaimed. My father's family is nothing. So when the time came for Saul to give his daughter Merab in marriage to David, he gave her instead of Adriel, a man gave her he gave her instead to Adriel, a man from Manoah. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Michal had fallen in love with David, and Saul was delighted when he heard of it. Here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines, Saul said to himself. But to David, he said, today you have a second chance to become my son-in-law. Then Saul told his men to say to David, the king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law? When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, how can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price from the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he told them, tell David that all I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer. Before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. Then David fulfilled the king's requirement by presenting all their foreskins to him. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to David to be his wife. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Every time the commanders of the Philistines attacked, David was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous. All right. So who's going to be apparently while I was reading Andrew caught a fish. All right. I'm assuming that's what the reference is.
Nice catch.
Okay, so who's going to be the first one to talk about 214? And go. So all jokes aside, you want so something stood out to me in reading this. Now I'm going to break the rules, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because generally there's like 2 or 3 stories for David that are like the things that we think about with David. And David and Uriah is one of them. And I think it's interesting that what we're reading here that Saul is trying to do to David with what David ends up doing later on in
Yeah.
his story. I'm sure at some point I've read this before, but sitting here stopping and like going through chapter by chapter, line by line, verse by verse, different things stand out to me. It's an interesting thing to think about with how the full life cycle of David ends up working.
Yeah. I think what's big in this story is how the resentment of Saul begins to build with this weird little song that, wasn't even really, I mean, we read through 17. David, slayed Goliath, but he didn't kill tens of thousands, right? And so this song is like, where did they get this from? Why did they start singing this? Because it ends up really vexing Saul, and the distressing spirit that was sent from God, this just comes back on him out of nowhere. And now David can't even play it away. He can't even play the spirit away. This guy's throwing a javelin at him, trying to pin him to the wall. It's like, wow. So what's interesting here is David never flinches, period. Because you would think after somebody just tried to pin you to the wall with a javelin that you would stop talking to him. You'd stop being around him. He tried to kill you with a javelin, and then he says, "Here, take my daughter." Like, wait a minute, something, you know. But David seems so humble, almost naive in this story that is
Yeah.
there's nothing there. Like, I come from a humble family. I can't afford the bride price. Everybody's like, no, come on, come on. And it's like David is this. He really is this kid, right? I don't know how old he is by now, but he really does seem very humble, very unassuming. But God's blessing and favor is on him, and Saul can see it, and Saul is frustrated by it. The one thing that I didn't want to jump over, right, was the relationship between Jonathan and
Yeah.
David, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of conversation about that. And I don't want to get us booted off the air or anything, but some people use it for justification, right, for same-sex attraction. They read that into this particular text when that's not what this is about. This is about two individuals that see each other as brothers, and they are not. There's nothing sexual here. This is
Yeah.
this is genuine. This is there's nothing indecent about what they're doing, but there is a love for one another, and they bond pretty quickly. And to see that in scripture is interesting. But there's people that read other things into this. You guys, and I'm a turn it around. Have you guys had to deal with anything in this sex with that type of justification?
Normally, whenever I've heard that, um, typically it's the thing that I always see with it that I find heartbreaking, I guess, more than anything. Oh, I got another one on while I'm saying that. Um, is the fact that what it shows is how few people actually have found that kind of friendship
Right.
anymore. Um, it's one of those things where it's like, they're telling on themselves type of thing where, oh, you went in the weeds and now I'm stuck. Um, they're telling on themselves sort of things like, why is it that the only relationships we can have to be romantic sexual? Like, why is it that this idea of having a relationship with somebody and loving somebody has to react like that? And especially for us as believers, like, why is that where we're going automatically? Of the fact that, well, every relationship automatically must have some kind of sexual component to it. It's like we're this is the type of relationship we're called to have with everybody. Realistically, I mean, this is what we're supposed to have, is this kind of a relationship that is closer than brothers, that is defined by the Spirit, that is latched on in that kind of a manner. And so that typically is what I've seen, is much more people that unfortunately people don't understand how this works because they've not seen it themselves. And that's, I think, I would say that's more of a tragedy in the conversation than anything else.
Yeah, I can't speak to where people have been as far as whether or not they understand how this works or whatever like that. But I can say um floating in out of I'm thinking, yeah, I would say I'm probably the most liberal leaning out of everybody on the network. I would think maybe Tiara, depending on what the subject is. But floating in the circles that I float in, yeah, I've heard that all. That this is an example of same sex attraction and all of that sort of stuff. And while I have opinions and stances and things like that are not a part of the conversation currently, um, I I remain in every single aspect of the conversation that the second that we bring in the scriptures, we are under the responsibility to be authentic and treat
Yeah.
them well, and not make them say what we want them to say.
Right.
I don't know as though I would go as far as some of the things that you said, Andrew, about this is what we're called to as believers and all of this sort of stuff. I think this can just sit at the level of close friendship, and we can call it a day there without it being anything more than that. Um, but there is no context in this. Do the word study, do the contextual study, do all of it. You're arguing out of silence, like literally arguing out of silence to say that this is advocating same sex attraction. Yes, but the opposite side of the coin there is it is also not explicitly saying, like, it's not saying, but
Right.
it's
Yeah.
not saying it either. And
And
that
that's where you.
when you're
But
talking,
that's right. That's like you said. You're arguing out of silence. So
yeah,
I.
exactly. If you're going to try and advocate it, then the burden of proof is on you to say
Right.
that this is what it's saying, and it's just not there. And so, like, that's, yeah, it's aggravating to me, not out of a place of moralistic stuff, whatever, but more out of a place of um I while I have stances on the whole idea of sola scriptura and the whole idea of textual perfection and all infallibility and all of that sort of stuff, I still think that the scriptures that we have in front of us are God inspired and are say what they say for the reason that they say it, and need to be studied accurately and honestly to actually understand and get the richness of the not just the understanding the story aspect of it, but the fact that, like, that the Bible speaks to the fact that the idea behind the scriptures is that they pierce the heart,
Yeah.
that they are, there's this supernatural spiritual thing that happens as we understand God's voice. We can't understand God's voice and read our own things into scripture all at the same time. We just can't. We're doing two separate things. It's like one wheel going one direction, the other wheel going the other direction. You're not going to get it. So,
Yeah.
Well, and I would
From
I would add also that from like the whole point of why the David Jonathan relationship matters is that it's a we're back to what we talked about last week of Jonathan really is showing how far Saul
yeah,
has gone because Jonathan last week was the one that he recognized what God was doing. He was the one that recognized that God had authorized this attack. He was the one that knew his dad had gone off the deep end with his punishments and things like that. And here again, we've got the same thing of while Saul is out here trying to kill David out of jealousy and out of having this bad spirit in him. Here's Jonathan, like, no, this is my brother. Like, why are we doing this? Like, I know my dad's nuts, but we're still here,
that's nuts.
and we're still going to be doing this.
Yeah. From a personal standpoint, I grew up with a friend that wherever you saw him, you saw me. We played basketball together. We went to school together. We hung out at each other's house. And I remember the first time an accusation came, like, "Hey, you know, are you guys, you know?" And it's like, why would you think? Because we're
Right.
close, because we call each other brothers, because we hang out. We're tight like that. You see one, you see the other, and I just think it was a conclusion. you know, and I think this is where the idea of homophobia comes in, because there's an actual fear of that. Instead of two guys just being friends, it doesn't have to be anything more than that. Um, and it's genuine. And I think you said something very important, Andrew, that there's a lot of people that have never experienced that, so they're kind of telling on themselves that you
Yeah.
can't be close like that and there not be something more, right? And
Yeah.
that's not true. You can have a strong, genuine friendship with someone that may last a lifetime, you know, and there not be anything more than just a genuine friendship. So anyway, I think Joe froze on us. I don't know if he's there
I
or
don't
he's
know because I
frozen.
still can't see. I still can't see you guys.
Okay,
So
well, he's frozen. I'm gonna hit this other part. Michael, the daughter who becomes the wife. It's interesting how fond of David she is now, and
right.
we know how the story we know we know what's going to happen, right? But it's interesting how fond of him she is now. She's excited, to be there. She's excited to marry him. There we go. There's another catch, y'all. Man, y'all, celebrate these catches. um, she's very fond of him right now, but we know that that's going to take a turn later on.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting, and David becomes. Shameless plug. I wrote a book, and I kind of featured David as one of the individuals that God actually made famous. That fame
Yeah.
is not a bad thing. It's what we do with the fame. It's what we do with the notoriety. Those that are on platforms that, hey, man, maybe you got a million views on a video or you got tons of subscribers, all that kind of stuff. That's not a bad thing. What's a bad thing is what it does to us. And so
Yeah.
David is starting to build that type of fame, and he's being recognized. His name is starting to be talked about, and so it's important that David remains humble and focused on God. And I like that that's where he remains as he goes forward. But that's something, and me and you could talk about it while Joe is figuring out his connection. You know, when you think about fame, why do we, as believers, say that we should kind of disassociate ourselves from words like that? And we
Well,
shouldn't talk about. Yeah, go ahead.
I, I think what's weird is that I don't think we do. I think we're just very selective of who we think should have it.
Okay, okay.
You know what I mean? Because, like, I mean that was the whole thing. Those of you that saw the Pastor Reacts that Joe and I did a few weeks ago, after the death of John MacArthur, like their followers are more than happy that he had fame. You know,
Right,
people are more than happy to platform Billy Graham. People are more than happy right now to platform all sorts of nonsense that they think is going. The whole, you know, the Christian media stuff that goes on that, in many ways, don't like our version of Christian media that we do within KFM. Those kind of things. It's everywhere. That kind of stuff. But if it's not the person that we think fits the mold, then at that point it's, well, you're just selling out the gospel and you're doing this and you're doing that. And the phrase I hear a lot is selling out the gospel.
right,
And but it only applies to the people that you think don't fit the right mold. If you fit the right mold, then they're all for platforming you. They'll
right,
donate. They'll do everything because you're doing God's work. But if you don't fit the right mold, then you're just selling out the gospel and you need to repent and humble yourself.
right.
And so it's much more of a, I think it's about who is being platformed than the idea of platforming and being made famous and everything else.
Yeah, yeah. Because David's one of those people, and I know when I was writing my book, it was David. It was different individuals where it literally said that God, you know, uh, uh, put them in a position where they became well known. They became highly
Yeah.
esteemed. They became famous. And it says at the end of this chapter that David's name became famous. It became highly esteemed and well known, and for a lot of people, that's a dangerous thing. That's, oh no, don't do that. Don't you don't want to be famous. You don't want to be. And I just think it's what we do with it. And I like what you said, Andrew.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just I don't want that person to be famous. I don't think they should have that platform. They should have that
Yeah.
much influence. And so, yeah. All right. I think Joe is back on. I don't know what happened.
I was here the entire time. I have no idea why my camera just stopped working.
Oh yeah, because
Um,
we couldn't see you or anything.
so,
Although I haven't seen you for hours, so
yeah, that's
Right.
because you're out in the middle of the lake. Um, so yeah, I'm looking at I'm hearing the last part of what you said and looking at the comment section, wondering where you guys went. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the steering wheel and drive us back onto mainland here for a second. No, I'm just playing. So um, let's go
got another
ahead
one.
and
Ooh.
jump back into
Oh.
the text.
So
Uh,
so what we did was we went through the rest of the passage. We talked about David's marriage, and then got to the end of the final statement of the passage was that David's name gained fame across the land. So that's where we ended. So you're right on cue.
all right, let's go ahead and jump back in with chapter 19. Saul now urged his servants and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David, told him what his father was planning. Tomorrow morning, he warned, you must find a hiding place in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out. The next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. The king must not sin against his servant David, Jonathan said. He's never done anything to harm you. He has always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill the Philistine giant and how the Lord brought a great victory to all Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? There is no reason for it at all. So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. Afterward, Jonathan called David and told him what had happened. Yeah. Then he brought David to Saul, and David served in the court as before. War broke out again after that, and David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. But one day, when Saul was sitting at home with spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him again. As David played the harp, Saul hurled his spear at him, but David dodged out of the way, and, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. Then Saul sent troops to watch David's house. They were told to kill David when he came out the next morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, if you don't escape tonight, you will be dead by morning. So she helped him climb through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then she took an idol and put it in his bed, covered it with blankets, and put a cushion of goat's hair at its head. When the troops came to arrest David, she told them he was sick and couldn't come out of bed. But Saul sent troops back to get David. He ordered, bring him to me in his bed so I can kill him. But when they came to carry David out, they discovered that it was only an idol in the bed with a cushion of goat's hair at its head. Why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape? Saul demanded again. I had to, she replied. He threatened he threatened to kill me if I didn't help him. So David escaped and went to Ramah to see Samuel, and he told him all that Saul had done to him. Then Samuel took David with him to live at Noah. Then, when the report reached Saul that David was at North in Ramah, He sent troops to capture him. But when they arrived and saw Samuel leading a group of prophets who were prophesying, the Spirit of God came upon Saul's men, and they also began to prophesy. When Saul heard what had happened, he sent other troops, but they too prophesied. The same thing happened a third time. Finally, Saul himself went to Ramah and arrived at the great well in Second. Where are Samuel and David? He demanded. They are at Naya in Ramah, someone told him. But on the way in Ramah, the Spirit of God came even upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy all the way to Noah. He tore off his clothes and laid naked on the ground all day and all night, prophesying in the presence of Samuel. The people who were watching exclaimed, "What is even Saul a prophet?" All right. Yeah, I mean, this feels like this is going to be now the story for a hot minute of the back and forth chase between David and Saul.
Yep, it has begun.
Yeah. One thing I feel like we didn't touch on that I feel like needs to touch on is the fact that that should not be taken out of context as some weird curse or something along those lines. It is like it's there and we deal with it, but we don't turn it into something larger than it actually is.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things that could trip you up if you're not paying attention to what's happening. You know that, and I think we said it a couple, maybe last week or the week before, that at this point Saul is just writing out his sentence because the kingdom's already been taken from him. He just doesn't know it yet.
Yeah.
He's already under judgment, and he's acting like a guy who realizes, hey, my time might be up. I think they want to give him the kingdom. I think, and so there's a lot of things working, in him, against him. And he's focused on David instead of focused on the Lord and trying to, get things right with the Lord. He's attacking David. And it almost seems like insanity, right? He's just sitting there and he just pulls a javelin and just, I'm just going to kill you right here and now. And then goes after him, tells his daughter, "What are you doing, betraying me?" This is all out. And like you said, it has begun the back and forth. And David, again, I don't know how he's able to stay so humble, never attack Saul back. Obviously, David is a capable fighter. We know what he can do. If he wanted to take Saul out, he could. And we'll find out later how he views it. And that's going to be a whole nother discussion. But he maintains his position and he never raises his hand against Saul. He keeps his distance. He runs from him, even though we know that David is a capable fighter. So it's interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean the. Go ahead, Joe.
No, good.
Because I mean the hard thing with this passage specifically, I think that is it almost kind of seems out of place in some ways. Not the fact that Saul's mad and trying to kill David, but the whole process of like David goes to Samuel, Samuel takes him in. Next thing we know, Samuel and all these other prophets are out there prophesying, and the Spirit of God takes over all these other people, and then more people, and then even Saul gets the Spirit of God back for a day.
Right.
Mhm.
Like that sort of thing. It almost seems out of place. I mean, it obviously it carries important weight, and like we said, it starts the process that we're going to see for a couple of chapters and most of the rest of the book. But as much as we have been warning people to not over spiritualize everything, leading up to this point, this one is very much of just, it's a reminder of what the Spirit of God does when, that it's contagious, that, when God is in his glory, it's contagious, and that people take notice. Even people that thought that they would never see it again take notice. And it's it I've always with this passage been like, this is just kind of, it's just kind of strange, the placement of it and everything, and that it fits the narrative, but at the same time it's like it's a story that we expect more out of Judges realistically than we would expect out of Samuel.
Well, I would think almost New Testament. It almost
Or
seems
yeah,
like,
or New Testament, yeah.
it almost seems like New
Revival.
Testament. It's like, what in the world is going on here? But I think it messes with our categorization. We like to put things in neat little boxes,
Right.
and in these passages, God is not in these neat little boxes that we like to put him in. He's doing things that are just totally out of order for us. They're uncomfortable for us. Like, how is Saul got a distressing spirit, and then the Spirit of God comes on him, and then it's like, my brain, because I want it to be a neat little. This is how it goes, and in these passages, it's like God is saying, "Don't try to trap me in your little box."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think it matters so much to say what the point, to ask the question, what's the point of the text?
What's the point?
Because there's some of it that we don't actually have the um the details. We don't know the specifics of it, and we don't understand the exact nature of it all. And so when we don't try to when we let it sit in the context of the mysterious where it sits in the context of the mysterious, and we take the point where the point sits, we get a more well-rounded, even if not as exact and complete, picture of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
You know. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I think that's a good place to call it quits for today, and leave off. Ant, you want to go ahead and praise up?
Yeah, yes, sir, yes, sir. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for those that participated in this conversation, this study. Lord, I just pray that we would continue to seek you and find you in the scriptures and understand the process, the points, the purpose of what is written, so that we can draw closer to you and understand how to relate to you and how to be obedient in the things that we need to be obedient in, and how to understand the things that we are capable of understanding versus some things are beyond our understanding. And so, Lord, I thank you for these gentlemen. I thank you for those that are watching and those that will watch this on the replay. And I just ask that your blessing would be on each and every one of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, that's it. That's all. That's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We will be back next week, continuing on the walk through the Old Testament. Just a quick reminder on a couple of things, like I said at the top. If you are watching on one of the Twitch channels for the network, go ahead and chime in. Let us know that you are watching from there, and you will be entered into a drawing for a discount code for our merch shop. And also, if you are in need of prayer, we have a website, kfmbroadcasting.com/prayer, where you can go ahead and fill out the form and uh, we will get it and be praying for you. So that's it for now. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure that you stay tuned throughout the week for all of our live content going out. But for now, remember that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. All right.